This is a group of people that's getting disenfranchised, and the price of a meal at McDonald's has doubled. The price of their groceries has gone up 50%. And a bunch of people in that survey are saying things are fine because the reality is the majority of Americans have a home and a 401k. But for the third that don't, it has become borderline unlivable. The cost of housing, being able to cover an emergency. This is the first time in a generation we have a group of people truly becoming disenfranchised.
Which is a fascinating statement to hear on cable television when we keep hearing about how phenomenally the economy is doing. And look, to be fair, in some very narrow aspects, it is. But a brand new survey from the Federal Reserve is showing that the majority of Americans are still struggling to get by after years of inflation. And the inflation is impacting working Americans big time. I mean, you see it at the grocery store, you see it in other sectors of the economy, you certainly see it in housing, you see it in the cost of education. It goes on and on and on. So on Tuesday, the Fed released its economic well-being of US households report for 2023, examining the financial lives of US adults and their families. And I want to share some of the results with you. The report found that 72% of adults surveyed said that they were doing okay financially. That's a tick lower than last year, but well below the high of 78% in 2021 and still above the record low of 62% in 2013. Okay, so I want to stop here because Americans were doing or at least they reported doing way better, okay, in 2021. And what I'm kind of concerned about is that some of the elements of the Trump administration that American voters were unhappy with are the elements that are kind of starting to fade in their minds. And they're instead kind of thinking about how well their pocketbooks were doing during the Trump administration. There were still issues with the economy for ordinary working Americans, to be sure. But because of the aftermath of the coronavirus pandemic, because of, supply chain disruptions, because of all these issues that we've had impacting the economy, honestly, some of which have nothing to do with the White House, I think a lot of Americans are like, can we just go back to the Trump administration? We were doing better financially. So there is an element of unfairness there for Biden, but I don't know. I just think Biden has to be better in acknowledging that this is what Americans are feeling, rather than attempting to gaslight Americans into thinking that their economic situation is actually fantastic.
Pausing here to deliver some honest truth as we do in our news coverage as well. TYT is facing challenges, guys, as the entire industry is. You know who could make the difference? You. If you hit the join button below, it's gonna make all the difference and keep us in business. We appreciate you, thank you.
That actually leads to more resentment and frustration among voters. I should know because I feel it when I hear politicians talking about how wonderful the economy is. And then you see people in your community, people in your family, you yourself in your own household struggling with different elements of the economy, including inflation. And interest rates being high, that has nothing to do with Biden. But obviously that is leading to economic frustration among ordinary working Americans as well. Now, I'm gonna make a prediction here. I think the Federal Reserve is gonna lower interest rates maybe 2 months before the election. It's a little bit of a conspiracy theory for me, I admit it, but it might be them putting their thumb on the scale, we'll see. Now, inflation made the financial lives worse for 65% of US households, according to the report. Among those, 19% said it was much worse. Plus, incomes grew healthily in 2023, so that's where you see some silver linings to the economy, but so did spending. Monthly budgets remained tight, and more than half of adults didn't have money left over after paying their expenses. This was especially true for lower income adults who reported higher instances of not having enough to eat, not being able to cover bills in full, and skipping medical care. If you are now spending more money on groceries and housing due to inflation, your wages rising isn't really gonna be something you feel if your wages are not keeping up with that inflation, or more importantly, outpacing that inflation. And that's exactly what Americans are experiencing right now. Now, overall, 17% of adults reported that they could not pay all their bills in full in the month prior to the survey, which was conducted in October of 2023. And that doesn't surprise me. There are other reports that really, I guess, complement the findings of this Federal Reserve study that basically show consumer debt skyrocketing and also defaults on credit cards increasing, meaning 90 days or more late in making payments on credit cards. The number of Americans who are in that boat has increased in recent months. And only 63% of adults said that they're able to cover. Well, actually, that's not so bad. 63% of Americans said that they'd be able to cover a $400 emergency expense with cash on hand. So that's pretty similar to previous Federal Reserve reports about $400 emergencies. I'm actually happy to see that that number hasn't dipped even further. As for how people are perceiving the state of the economy more broadly, just kind of looking at how the economy is doing even outside of their personal household, the report showed improvement in people's feelings about how their local economy fared, with 42% saying it was good or excellent, versus 38% the year before. However, that share is a far cry from how people felt pre-pandemic. So this is going back to what I was saying about the happy feelings that people are suddenly having about Trump. In 2019, 63% felt their local economy was in good or excellent health. And when it comes to the national economy, similar story. Okay, they found that people's perceptions improved from 2022, so 22% last year, up from 18%. But they remain well below the 50% share notched in 2019. And so media outlets and Democrats have been kind of mystified as to why so many Americans are still having such negative feelings about the economy, despite what they say is inflation cooling. I'm gonna stop right there because I wanna kind of add a little more clarity to that talking point. What they mean with inflation cooling isn't that the prices are going down. It's that the prices of products are still rising. It's just that they're not rising as rapidly as before. I mean, you know what I mean? So the benchmark prices for things that we need, like groceries and housing, they've been set to a new level, and the prices continue to rise slowly month after month. Okay. So in 2022, I'll give you the exact numbers. US inflation hit 9.1%, which was the highest annual rate in more than 40 years. As of last month, it was 3.4%. So it's not that the prices have gone down. It's that rather than the prices going up another 9.1%, they went up another 3.4%. But it still means that prices are high, right? So including for things that people desperately need, stuff like food, gas, housing, and inflation does impact people in different socioeconomic statuses. This should be common sense. If you're already struggling economically, or if you're on the lower end of the socioeconomic ladder, you're gonna feel the impact of inflation a lot more. Let's watch.
We have, for example, low-income households consuming a lot more food than high-income households. If there's suddenly a lot of inflation in food, the low-income households actually experience more inflation.
So yes, the data show price hikes tapering, but not for everyone equally, echoes Stancheva.
We know there's inflation inequality, where the basket of goods that people consume will vastly shape the inflation they experience. So I think this is very important to bear in mind when thinking about people's stress responses, reactions, lived experience that might just not well be captured by our official statistics.
Which may help explain why consumer sentiment sank in May.
And by the way, let's talk a little bit about consumer sentiment and consumer spending, because there's been a little bit of a paradox in the economy, right? There's a lot of focus on how consumer spending is up despite inflation and reports of economic distress. But University of Michigan professor Joanne Su has an interesting and devastating theory as to why that might be.
What we are seeing is a combination of negative attitudes and positive spending. And this positive spending is not a reflection of some sort of internalized secret sense of confidence that consumers have. And instead, my interpretation is that consumers see that a lot of aspirational goals that we talk about as part of the American dream, home ownership, paying for college for your kids, having a comfortable retirement, with high prices and high interest rates right now, those aspirational goals just feel increasingly out of reach. And as a result, I think consumers are not really, they've kind of given up on saving for those things. And with strong labor markets, that enables them to spend now. And I think that's what we're seeing in the consumption patterns.
I think that theory is so on point, right? Because in the past, Americans felt that if they just diligently saved within a certain amount of years, if they budgeted, they'd be able to afford a down payment on a house. But now housing has become so out of reach for ordinary working Americans that I think rather than saving, they might just be spending that money on other things that they desire to kind of lessen the blow of how awful the economy is for people who want to do basic things that previous generations were able to do relatively easily compared to what we're experiencing now. And so, look, whenever I'm critical of Biden, I get some angry members of our audience who are like, oh yeah, well, if you don't want Biden to talk about how great the economy is, what do you suggest he does? I think it would be far more effective if Biden empathized and acknowledged the economic pain that Americans are feeling and laid out a plan for what he intends to do to lessen the blow. Gaslighting doesn't work. It infuriates people because regardless of how many times the Democratic Party or the Biden camp goes on television or speaks at rallies and declares that the economy is actually doing great, ordinary Americans are going to be informed by their personal experiences and the lives that they're living. They know what's in their bank accounts. They know what they're paying for rent or for their mortgage. They know what they spend on groceries, and they're upset. And I think that if Biden really wants to lean into the empathetic characteristics that he has, that could probably be a lot more effective than engaging in gaslighting.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.